Hey, James.
Yeah?
The Wi-Fi is out again. Can you come here and help me fix it, please?
Yeah, sure. Alright, what's up?
Well, I was trying to stream the Lord of the Rings films to get ready for the Tales of Middle-earth set.
Naturally.
Exactly, and then the modem started blinking at me.
Yeah, but it's blinking green. That means it's all good, right? Hold on, let me check. Oh, no, it's not. That's busted.
See, it's not working. A green light is usually good, though, right?
Walt and James.
Ah, well, that explains the green glow and the Wi-Fi being out.
It is time to get commanded.
Again? Oh, we just built you an Aristocrats-themed deck. I haven't played nearly enough test games with it. I need to tinker with it first. I heard there were some really cool new cards coming in the next set.
You have been assigned another deck archetype. You must build it now.
They just interrupted me.
Shut up, dude. Don't anger them.
But what if they asked me to build a synergy I already...
The deck's theme is lands.
Exactly, I already have that. I just built a Verna the Chaos Bloom.
Perfect. So we got this. I have a 5 World Sculptor deck. Easy.
And I assume... Yeah, now the theme song is playing.
Oh, I love these episodes.
And last time you stole my catchphrase.
It's time to get commanded.
Who writes these things? Welcome to the Get Commanded podcast by the Greensboro Commander community. It's the GCP by the GCC and POG, Palms Off Gaming, sponsor of this podcast. We're all uniting forces to help you to have better games of Commander. I'm your host, Walt.
And hello, Commander players. I'm your other host, James, and I didn't lie. I love these episodes.
You love when they invade our home and prevent us from doing things that we would like to do, like watch all of the Lord of the Rings films.
You've still got time. Like, you can do that after this.
I need like 8 hours, bro. I'm watching the extended
director's cut.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, like, I love these episodes because we just jump straight into it. We know what the transmission is.
Yeah, I guess we kind of already have it. So normally we get one, Deep Depths of the Galaxy, Space Commanders, time to get commanded, all that stuff. We've done that. So, right into it. Except, we have one more thing we'd like to say. Please consider signing up for our Patreon.
Yes.
It's the best way to support our work. There's plenty of really cool benefits on offer. There's Discord privileges, games with me and James, lots of other stuff there.
Yeah.
You can check them all out at patreon.com/getcommandedpodcast.
Even the opportunity to suggest a deck episode or an episode for us.
Yes, you could be interrupting my watching Lord of the Rings. That could be something you personally could be responsible for.
Do it halfway through the towers.
To split the Twin Towers into twin films.
Yep, that
Beautiful.
was a Freudian slip and a half. That was terrible.
Did you know that the Lord of the Rings books are actually... They were originally intended to be 6 novels?
That makes sense. A lot of sense.
Right? When you read them, they actually are still broken up into the books. They make a lot of sense. The first one is kind of like just sort of split like roughly halfway through the action. But 2 and 3... You have half the book, so like a book, in quotation marks, but half of Two Towers is Frodo and Sam, and the other half is everybody else.
Right, I get you. So it's like because it's done by chapter, right?
No, you do the whole book.
Oh, wow.
You have like literally like a quote book, so half the novel is just like Frodo and Sam doing their thing, and then the other half is the other one, and then, so when you get to the Return of the King, the first half is not Frodo and Sam, it's everybody else. So it leaves you at the cliffhanger of they're all at the gates of Mordor. The Mordor forces are coming out, and Gandalf says something like, "Oh, I really hope we just have to hope that Frodo and Sam are successful." Cut to Frodo and Sam beginning Return of the King.
Wow,
their journey there.
You really don't need to rewatch these films.
No, I'm intimately familiar with the plot.
All right, away from Lord of the Rings and to the actual command, so we can get our Wi-Fi back.
Sure,
and you can actually go back to watching.
I would like to leave the room as well.
Yeah.
That might be nice. So, what do they want? They want us to build a lands deck.
A lands-focused deck.
Interesting.
They just said lands.
They did say lands.
So I think it's probably good for us to have a think about what is a lands-themed commander deck.
Yes. I suppose there's kind of 2 camps that I can think of, because I've built both of these 2 types of decks.
You definitely have, yeah.
There's there's definitely landfall
Yes.
is one, but the other one that I think people don't talk about very often, which I built before, is lands matter.
Yeah, lands matter is very different to landfall.
There's overlap. Like, you can have landfall cards in a lands matter deck, but the lands matter, like, the main payoff is not necessarily, like, rampaging Baloths,
and
right?
the main win con is probably not going to be a landfall trigger that's winning you the game.
Yeah, it's not like 10 Lotus Cobra triggers,
Yeah.
or it's not like 10 Valakut Exploration triggers.
To be fair, though, you did say there was a lot of overlap. So in these lands matter decks, we will probably see landfall as a keyword.
Yes.
For sure.
Definitely we will. But a lands matter deck, and the example I'm thinking of is the deck that I built myself, which was my Rada Heart of Keld list.
Yes.
So this was a deck that you lets you play lands from the top of your library, but also it's a 3/3, has first strike on your turn, and you can pay 6, and it gets +X till end of turn, where X is the number of lands you control. So this was kind of like a lands matter sort of Voltron deck, where technically landfall could matter. There was definitely landfall cards in there, but the main win con of the deck was to pump Rada and make her really, really huge and kill someone with commander damage. So
because she has that ability, is pay 6.
Yeah, pay 6. 4 red green, and she gets a whole lot bigger. So that was my main win con I was aiming for. So the landfall was in there and it was a part of the deck, but my main thing was not necessarily get landfall triggers, it was get this many lands on the battlefield.
Yeah, so I guess you could refer to this as like a critical mass of lands.
Yes.
So that was like that was what mattered in the lands mattered deck.
Yeah, it was about the number of lands in total that I had. Yeah.
Yeah,
totally
and I guess there's a couple of other lands matter strategies, whereas Rada wants a lot of lands, and there are a lot of commanders. You've got like Multani, for example.
Oh, yeah.
That gets bigger based on the lands. There are some other commanders that care about what type of lands you're playing with.
Oh, totally. So like there's Gates decks, for instance.
There's actually a Gates commander that I've seen just recently. I'm pretty sure it's from the Boulders Gates set.
Oh, is this the Sultai one? The green, black, blue one?
That's the one. Yeah. Nine Fingers Keen.
I like calling him Nine Fingers Keen because it sounds like he's walked into a saloon.
Super keen.
No, I'm imagining Nine Fingers Keen like he's missing his trigger finger on one hand. He's like, oh, you better hope I don't pull my right pistol.
Because that's the one I can actually shoot.
I've got a metal finger on that hand.
It shoots way quicker. But this commander is a Gates commander.
Yes.
So it actually cares about like what type of land it is. So
the fingers are irrelevant.
Yeah.
Really.
some lands have like a different type. So we've actually just recently received a new type as well, spheres. We've got spheres now from Phyrexia Obi-Wan.
There's also, I mean, it's very rarely relevant in Commander, but there's Locust lands. I suppose you could build that. Tron lands or another one, Urza lands.
Yeah, so it's really bizarre. Anyway, I'll read you Nine Fingers because I thought it's really interesting as like a win condition.
Yeah, definitely.
Whenever Nine Fingers deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 9 cards of your library. You may put a gate card from among them onto the battlefield. Then, if you control 9 or more gates, put the rest of them into your hand. Otherwise, put the rest of them on the bottom of the library. So this actually cares about having 9 gates.
Yeah.
It also has Ward pay 9 life, which I think is really on theme.
That's very fun.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. Yeah, so I see what you mean. Like the strategy of this deck is lands still. Like we're definitely in the lands category, but it's specifically gates. So our whole strategy is about finding just those lands. And I suppose it's worth differentiating these two types of decks because a deck that's looking for only gates, a card like Sylvan Scrying, for instance, is kind of better. I'm sure we'll talk about this later. But,
yeah, definitely.
But finding specific lands is better in a deck like that.
Exactly. And like another commander that's like more specific types of lands matter is Hazazon. I think I'm saying that right. Shaper of Sand. Have you seen this?
The desert tribal one. Yeah.
So whenever a desert ETBs, you can basically get a 1/1 warrior or something like that. So you can...
Oh, I think they're Sand Warriors. Because it's a reference to like Secure the Waste. Oh, so there's some really old card that is... It's
from Armenket, I believe,
yes.
the desert.
No, it's older than that. It makes Sand Warriors... The original card, it's red, green, and white. It's Naya. There's a Naya card. I think you pay X and then Naya, and you make X 1/1 white Sand Warrior creature tokens, I believe.
I did just look up the card. They're 1/1 red, green, and white Sand Warrior creature tokens. So they're the same card.
A really old card that makes the same tokens, which is what this is a reference to, I think.
And the other thing that Hazazon does is allows you to play deserts from your graveyard. So it incentivizes you sacrificing them to have them re-enter the battlefield.
Sure.
So it's not about like, it says landfall on it, I guess, when the desert enters the battlefield. But it's specifically about the type type of land.
Sure.
So this is the distinction that I think is really important to make. There's obviously landfall decks, and then there's lands matter decks. But should we talk about like what a landfall deck wants to do?
Yeah, totally. So this is the mechanic landfall. This was sort of errated onto a few older cards recently, I believe.
Yeah,
but
the Oracle text now actually says landfall.
Yes.
Yeah.
But landfall just is the term for when a land enters the battlefield under your control, do this thing. So, there's cards that say, effectively, landfall, put a +1 counter on this creature. Or landfall, this creature gains trample until end of turn. Zendikar is the main plane we associate with specifically the landfall mechanic.
Yeah.
Most cards are from that plane.
Thematically, the lands of Zendikar are very much alive.
Yes.
So landfall was a mechanic that kind of allowed that theme to come alive in gameplay.
Yeah, in a very fun way.
Yeah.
But so mostly the focus of a landfall deck, and I do actually have a landfall deck now, as I said in the beginning. My Averna, the Chaos Bloom. This is a weird one because it's also a Cascade deck, but
semi-storm, semi-cascade, semi-landfall.
Yeah, but
you build weird decks, man.
I do build weird decks. But landfall is definitely a thing that I'm specifically aiming to do. There's cards like Rampaging Balos in the deck.
Every time a land ETBs, make a 4/4.
Yes, there's Lotus Cobra.
Every time a land ETBs, make a mana.
Yes. There's Valakut Exploration.
Every time a land ETBs, basically draw a card. It's kind of insanity.
Yeah. Cards that specifically say the words landfall on them. Yeah. So in these kinds of decks, like, yes, having lots of lands is good, but sort of the main focus...
The objective is actually putting these combinations together of landfall triggers to create value where one land triggers 10 different things and gets you an incredible amount of value that will just propel you into the lead.
Yes, it's like enhancing the land drops that you're getting. And so also the cards that are really good are ones that, for whatever reason, just make a bunch of lands ETB at the same time.
Yeah.
Even if it means going like down on some lands and up on others, like Harrow, it's all about like, if I can just get more lands.
2 lands
ETB, landfall.
And we'll talk about like win conditions later, but like I think that landfall triggers are like it's almost like the whole outweighs the sum of its parts.
Yes.
Kind of deal. So like one landfall trigger, maybe it's like I think Tunneling Geoped is the one where it
deals 1 damage to each opponent. Yeah.
Kind of okay on its own, but if you combine that with 10 other things that trigger when you play a land, that whole effect is just going to run away with the game.
Yes, definitely. So that there are a few legendary creatures that specifically say the word landfall on them. Omnath, Locus of Rage is the really common one. This is the green and red 7-drop. Whenever a land ETB is under your control, you make a 5/5 elemental, and then whenever an elemental dies, you deal 3 damage to any target.
So that says very distinctly, have lands enter, have elementals die, win like that.
Yeah. I mean, even without the elementals dying, like just having 5 landfall triggers in a turn make 25 power worth of elementals.
Board,
it's crazy.
And you're in
good.
red, you can give them haste easily.
Yes, absolutely.
But then you've got my boy, the plant man himself.
Oh, Phylaf.
Cruel Avenger of Zendikar. Phylaf World Sculptor is a 6 mana 5/5 from memory.
I think it's a 5/5, yeah.
Anyway, it's an elemental. When it ETBs, you create a number of 0/1 plants equal to the number of basic lands you control.
Specifically basics,
We'll talk about that later.
We'll talk about that.
But then whenever a land ETBs, you can put 4 +1 counters on a target plant you control.
Yeah, you talked about this deck before where you are sort of, like, it is a landfall deck, definitely, but you also like to do, like, fling and...
I have a sub-theme of making one plant incredibly tall with +1 counters, and then casting a spell like Fling, 1 in a red, sacrifice a creature, deal damage equal to the creature's power.
Yep.
You can just kill someone quickly with that.
Take 24 damage, please.
Yeah. It's pretty brutal.
Definitely.
But then there are other commanders as well that have landfall, which is pretty cool in other colours, like Tatyova Benthic Druid has blue.
Simic, yeah.
Nutty commander.
So strong.
Super strong. Is like a, CEDH Spectrum commander.
Yeah, no, Tatyova Turns is totally in the CDH database.
Yep.
I know for a fact that having talked to some people in our Discord server, that Tatyova, because so basically for PEDH, Pauper EDH,
which is something we haven't talked about a lot on this podcast.
We haven't.
Yet.
Maybe we'll have to sometime
we'll dive
in the future.
into it soon.
But you have to have an uncommon creature as the commander. It doesn't have to be legendary. It just has to be uncommon. And I know for a fact that Tatyova is like tier 1 Pauper EDH. Yeah, because it's an uncommon creature that is regular CEDH viable. So I'm sure even with commons, it's still busted.
But then I kind of wanted to highlight here that your commander doesn't have to actually actually have the landfall word on it.
No.
There are some other commanders that incentivize landfall play patterns.
Definitely.
The one that I'm thinking of at top of mind, because our friend Abe plays it.
Yes.
And we've seen this. This was actually one of the first commanders we ever played against.
This might have been in the first Commander game I played. I reckon there's a strong chance the first Commander game I ever played was against Mina and Dan.
Do you reckon, what would the pod have been? It would have been...
Probably Joda?
No, the Morphs.
Oh, the Morph
Savine.
Precon.
I was playing Savine back then, so I reckon it was Savine.
Savine, the Cadenas Linking Sorcerer Morph deck.
Azor the Lawbringer.
Azor the Lawbringer and Mina and Dan.
I reckon that was our first ever Commander pod.
How beautiful.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
Look how far we've
Memories,
come.
yeah.
Except Abe's still playing Mina and Den.
Two of those decks still exist.
It's true. The Mina and Den deck that he plays specifically got an upgrade recently. It's really, really strong.
But that's the one that I was referring to. When,
yes.
Like, it doesn't say landfall on it.
No.
It actually says, like on the card, it says you can play an additional land, and then you can pay a red and a green and bounce a land to your hand. Target creature gains trample till end of turn.
So this is kind of doing the other side, where everything that has landfall is better because of this commander, because just on the commander's card, you can hit 2 land drops every turn, right? You could just like bounce lands to your hand, play them again. Bounce lands to your hand, play them again. You get at least 2 of them every turn.
It's kind of insane how... And we'll talk about some loops that you can get into with Mina and Den later, because it's really cool.
But importantly, this card doesn't say landfall on it, but it still would probably be a landfall deck, because probably, and I will say this having seen the deck list, almost all the other cards in the deck say landfall on them, because you're getting landfall with the commander.
It's almost like the enhancer in your deck, the commander.
It is actually, I would say so.
And in a similar vein, Soul of Windgrace is another one that does this.
This is the Jund one, right?
Yeah,
green, black, red.
It basically, when it attacks, you return a land from graveyard to the battlefield.
Yep.
But you can like discard lands and discard cards to Soul of Windgrace for extra value. But like he himself doesn't have landfall, but he says, I'm going to get you more lands than you should on every one of your turns.
Yeah.
I can help you with landfall triggers.
Well, the tech with the Soul of Windgrace deck is you just play like every fetch land you can get your hands on, even if it's Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse, because you sacrifice that and put it into your graveyard, attack with Soul of Windgrace, bring it back, do that every turn.
Again.
Yeah.
It's insane. Well,
if you want to see like all of these commanders sort of laid out, like the sort of different versions of the strategy, I recommend going to EDH Rec, going to themes, and then just going the lands theme. And there'll be like, there's very many commanders that fit this theme.
I checked it the other night. I think there is like in terms of how many decks are under that theme, like 12 to 14,000.
I believe that. I reckon it's probably
there is a
top
landfall
10.
category as well. Like there's
interesting.
2 different categories of landfall and lands, but yeah, the lands deck is just chock-a-block. Yeah, it's insane.
Totally.
I guess the other thing that would be a bit of a miss of what, and we've already kind of talked about it, if we didn't consider where our commander fit in our strategy.
Yes.
We've already started saying this about how like Mina and Den help landfall strategy, so it's the enhancer in the deck.
Yes.
But is it the payoff or is it the enhancer? So like for example, Phylath is a payoff from having lots of basics and a landfall trigger going into the battlefield.
Yeah, but that's probably somewhere in the middle almost as well, because you definitely want all the lands first before you get Phylath, but then every subsequent land drop is also getting you the extra stuff. So
probably why I run Mina and Den in the 99 in that deck.
Probably. But yeah, I think this is really important, is that when you're thinking about how you're building your deck, because this is the beginning, right? Probably picking the commander pretty early on. Think about which role, the commander is fitting within the deck. Like Mina and Den is the enhancer there. And then you need to kind of backwards build the deck from there.
Yeah.
So like in Mina and Den, I would be playing very few cards that say you may play an additional land on each of your turns, because Mina and Den does that.
Yep.
I don't really need that many versions of this same effect in general.
I'd rather another landfall trigger.
I'd rather have a landfall payoff for sure, So it's sort of about like what specific part of the deck the commander is, because you're just going to need a lot less of those because your commander's in the command zone. You can get it all the time.
Makes sense. Well, look, I got inspired with lands and have done a little bit of prior reading, mainly because I was trying to get on top of my own Phylath deck. I was trying to build it up.
Sure.
I was really curious to know how many commanders actually have the landfall trigger on them.
Like the word landfall.
The word landfall, or has been since errated to landfall. Do you want to have a guess at how many there are? It's a very popular type.
Legendary creatures that say landfall. Off the top of my head, I would have to say like 30, I reckon.
Way less.
Way less?
12.
12?
There are 12 legendary creatures that have the landfall triggered keyword on them.
Wow, that is way less than I thought they'd be.
Do you know what was even more interesting when I started to have a look at like how the colors break down in the landfalls? It's exactly how you would expect it.
Sure.
I'm really curious. Run through what you think, or just what's your top color of a landfall deck?
It's got to be green.
Exactly. Green. Immediately. Green had 9 out of 12 of those commanders represented.
Okay.
Represented green.
That makes sense.
The next color, what do you reckon?
Probably red?
Yep. 7 out of 12.
Okay.
Yep. Next is a little bit trickier.
White, blue, or black. I think based on the fact that I know Obun exists.
Yeah, fair enough.
And I know that the Zendikar Rising had a white as a thing. I think
Felidar
I would
Retreat's pretty good.
Yeah, I would go white probably third.
You're close. Blue and white were close. Blue had 4 out of 12.
Right.
White had 3 out of 12.
Wow, more blue than white. That
Obun being one of them.
interesting.
Yeah,
there you
obviously.
go. Yeah, cool.
And black actually had one.
Really?
Yes, there is a legendary creature demon, Obnixilis the Fallen, actually has no other text. He has landfall. I'm pretty sure it's something. I'll look up the card right now to make sure I don't get it wrong.
I think it's like, is this the one where like it drains someone unless you put counters on him? Is it that?
I think it's like
mechanic. Like either someone can take 3 or he gets 3 counters or something. I don't know. That's off the top of my head. I can't. You don't see this one very often, definitely, and not at the helm. I'd be shocked to see many mono.
No, and to be honest, I'm really curious if anyone can build an Obnixilis the Fallen deck. But I'll read out the card verbatim. It's 3 black and a black for a legendary creature demon that's a 3/3. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may have target player lose 3 life. If you do, put 3+1 counters on Obnixilis.
Oh, okay.
So it's just
no matter what, you get the counters and the life loss.
Landfall, basically lightning bolt, and put 3 counters on it.
That's pretty sick, actually.
Wild,
I would love to see a list.
When you look at how many colors represent landfall on your legendary creatures, it's pretty easy to see red and green are your top 2 colors.
And mostly it's going to be green plus something else, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was 9 out of 12 of them had green in their color identity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it really gives us an indication of when we're looking at commanders, where the support is, because that's where the printings are.
That's true. Yeah, totally.
A good little stat rundown for you. But I guess before we move into the breakdown of how we're actually going to build this deck, now I've thought about the commanders, the strategy, thought I'd throw out a bit of a thesis statement for this build.
We had one similar for the Aristocrats deck archetype episode when we gave that the rundown. So what's the thesis of a land statement?
Well, the thesis of a land statement, as far as I understand it, and I'm willing to learn, because my 5 life deck, after having a look into lands decks online, my 5 life deck needs some work.
Sure.
But my thesis statement that I've written down here is all commander decks will have a land base. However, my lands are a part of my deck's strategy. I will utilize the quantity, the utility, and enter the battlefield effects to gain value by performing a game action, playing the most important card of Magic's history, a land.
Interesting. Yep. Yeah. No, that makes sense to me. It's kind of the whole gist of the deck. My lands being played is better than your land being played.
Yeah, mine are actually going to get me value.
Anything you can do, I can do.
I did want to also highlight something, because I didn't really know when to talk about it, and I think it's probably a good place to talk about it now. It's actually a rule thing that a lot of people get wrong about lands decks.
Right.
And the rules is that a land being played does not pass priority. But a landfall trigger does pass priority.
That makes sense. So if you playing a land puts a trigger on the stack, then you move around the table and go, does anyone want to respond to that? Yeah, I think I remember reading somewhere that playing a land is considered, I believe, a special action.
A special action.
So it doesn't lose the stack.
Same thing with pre-game actions are considered special actions.
Yeah, I think,
can't respond to them.
I think putting your companion into your hand from the companion zone is considered a special action as well. So you can't respond to someone paying the 3 generic mana to put it in their hand.
But in 6 months that rules will change.
They'll write it again. Yeah, gosh, I hope not.
But I thought that was a good thing to highlight.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I guess the first thing that we're going to be thinking about when we're building our lands deck is how many lands do we even want in the deck?
79.
Definitely more than a usual deck, right? Like
the clue is in the name. Lands. Our deck is about lands.
Definitely. I suppose there's also an argument like it's worth playing more of them, but equally we have a very high chance of pulling them out of our deck with our spells. So we want more, but not 60, right?
No.
Probably like so. Our recommendation when we had our deck building template was 35 to 40 lands, I believe. I reckon this is a deck where we want to be closer to 40 than to 35, right?
Yeah, for example, I looked on your list just recently. Your Averna deck runs 37.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's actually... I thought I'd be slightly higher than that.
Yeah, I thought so too. Well, my Fire Left deck runs 36 lands currently, and I think it needs to run more.
Yeah.
And I think after seeing it play out, I do think that more lands are needed in that deck. So maybe I'll push it up to 40, see what happens. Maybe I can cut it down from there.
But you definitely wouldn't be at 35.
No, I wouldn't even be... Like, some decks, like, you know, for example, some of my decks actually run below 35 lands. Like, Yuriko has a very low land count because it's functioning at a very low land... very low mana value. Even though its curve looks ridiculous.
We talked about in the Mana Curve episode, but yes, it's a very strange deck where all the spells that you actually cast cost almost nothing. Yeah. And everything else costs 8 or 9 mana.
A billion mana. Yep. But yeah, it's like comparatively, the lands deck is something I will refuse to go under 35.
Definitely.
Because there's a lot of like things that you want to consider when you're thinking about your win condition. We'll talk about it later, but like your win condition could look like a ton of lands entering the battlefield at one time. So you could cast something like Boundless Realms, which is just a huge spell that pulls a lot of lands out your deck, has them all ETB, and if you've already played 20 lands, you're only going to go get 10. So if you're only running 30 lands, you're only going to get 10.
Yeah.
But if you're running 40, you can get 20.
You definitely don't want to get to that spot where you run out of lands in your deck that you can get. I know for a fact, having talked to a friend of mine, David, who we've mentioned a few times before, who builds very, very good commander decks. I seek his advice often, or take his advice seriously when he gives it.
I think I've beaten him once.
Yeah, he wins a lot. He's a very good player. He plays a lot of CDH. But he said he's got a Omnath deck, the red and green Omnath.
Locus of Rage.
Yes. He said that every land in that deck either is fetchable or fetches.
That's a really clever way to build the mana base.
So basically it's impossible for him to miss, right? He never cracks an Evolving Wilds. Well, he'd have to find every fetchable land in his deck. He doesn't have any of those, like he doesn't have any scry lands or life gain lands, or
which are not the only way you can get them onto the battlefield is by playing them for your land for turn.
Yeah, or you know, there's like a couple of ways to do it, but mostly in landfall decks you're using, you know, cards like Three Visitors, Nature's Law, that kind of thing. And so you're not going to get those deck cards out of your deck, but you should have a good chunk of them that you can get, definitely.
Yeah, and I think then we now like teeter into that debating realm of the basic versus non-basic land debate.
Sure.
Because, yeah, obviously you're a budget player. You love your basics.
I do love my basics.
And you'll go to the end of the earth to get the white bordered basics from 8th edition and 7th edition.
They're beautiful.
But for reasons other than aesthetic and budget appeal, I think there's some actual mechanical things that we need to consider around basics and non-basics.
Sure.
So you just described one of them that David laid out, that none of the lands in his deck are misses by cracking a fetch land.
Yes.
So they're all typed, or they're all basic types, or they're, you know, like a Temple of Abandon, which is is that the red green?
That's
one?
the scry land. Yeah.
Yeah, but you can't get that from cracking a fetch land.
Yeah, exactly right. Whereas a card like Wooded Ridgeline, which always enters tapped, is a mountain and forest in its types. So if I use my Farseek, or if I crack one of my Odyssey fetch lands, Invasion fetch lands, like what's the red?
Flooded
green Strand,
or Wooded Foothills.
Wooded Foothills,
red
one of those that can find typed lands. I can find that Wooded Ridgeline, where I can't find the scry land. So yes, that's definitely a benefit, is you can go and find the lands using your fetch lands and that kind of thing.
And we'll talk about like the value of like repeatedly using fetch lands because it's multiple landfall triggers, all that kind of stuff. But with my deck, my Firelaf deck, I'm not sure if you caught it, was when I said it makes plants equal to the number of basic lands I control.
I'm glad it's worded like that. It actually sort of requires you build your deck a particular way.
Yes.
I think I remember you telling me once that you thought you weren't running enough basics, specifically because of that line of text where it was like, actually, in Phylath specifically, you want the basic lands.
Yeah, because everyone calls Phylath the Gruul Avenger of Zendikar.
Yes.
Because Avenger of Zendikar ETBs and makes plans equal to the number of lands you control.
Yes.
However, Phylath has this restriction, and I think it was designed in this really clever way because it does sit in your command zone.
Yep.
It wants to incentivize you building the deck in the right way. But there are other cards that actually care about the basic type land.
Sure.
So, for example, Valakut Molten Pinnacle.
Oh, this one, when you play a land, if it's a mountain and you control 5 or more other mountains...
Nailed it, yep.
It deals 3 damage to any target.
Correct. And it's a land in and of itself, but not a mountain.
But not a mountain,
weird.
yeah. So you do need 5 other mountains first.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's true. Molten Pinnacle, until you reach that 5 mountain specifically limit, doesn't do anything. So you need to have, even that wooded ridgeline will count as a mountain.
But your Temple of Abandon won't.
No, so there's a benefit in that deck that's playing a Valakut Molten Pinnacle of having quite a few mountains that you can specifically find and hit.
Yeah. So look, there's a new card that's just been recently printed that I thought was a good discussion point here.
Sure.
Root Path Purifier. You heard of this card?
Oh, this is the 4-mana creature that makes all lands in your library and everywhere basic?
Yeah, do you want me to read the actual rules
Sure,
text? So
yeah.
it actually says lands you control and lands in your library are basic.
So...
There's some really cool things you can do with this.
There's some very cool things you can do that you can, for instance, crack evolving wilds and get that Temple of Abandon.
You can, because it is now a basic land.
Which is so strange. You could use Myriad Landscape, which... Oh no, that specifically finds basics that have a type.
Yes.
I think that actually wouldn't work.
That doesn't work,
It's a weird example that wouldn't work.
Anything that says fetch, like even cultivate. Go get basic lands from your library. You can tutor any lands now.
You could get Gaia's Cradle, put on the battlefield tab.
If you're running Obnixilis in a black landfall deck, I don't know, go for it. You could get Cabal Coffers and Urborg with this down. You could feasibly do this.
There's a lot of upside here. I said it before when I saw this card spoiled. I was talking in a group chat with some people at the time. A lot of people were like, "Oh, well, this will be super budget friendly," and I was like, I think it won't, for one. I think it's settled around like $12 or $13, which is not budget friendly.
It also screams break me. In my opinion. It screams break me.
It's just at this weird spot where it's like you need a certain number of cards that search for basics specifically in order for it to be good, which means you actually have to play what are in general slightly worse versions of effects, right? Yeah. So Rampant Growth becomes better with Root Path Purifier than Nature's Law might otherwise be, right?
Because Farseek or...
Yeah. Because you're finding specifically basics. Yeah. But then equally, so you can't get that busted with it because every other card in your deck has to be planned around the idea of playing this card.
I think, now hear me out on this,
sure.
If this was a legendary creature...
Oh, different story.
A mono-green deck where you could run all those green ramp effects that tutor basics.
Yeah.
You could run literally no basic forests. Yeah. And a million other lands.
That would be so good.
Still tutor everything.
Yeah, that would be far too good in my opinion. But it's an interesting card. I like it. I think it's a cool design space. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly which deck really likes it. I know, for instance, though, that your Phylath deck
loves it.
Phylath deck loves it. Absolutely, it does.
Because it means when Phylath enters the battlefield, all my lands are basic.
Then you get actual Gruul's Avenger of Zendikar.
Yeah, then I actually get the Avenger of Zendikar effect.
For sure. I suppose that there's definitely benefits, though, also to the non-basic lands that you might want to put in.
Yes.
There are definitely, utility lands that we will want to put in our decks.
But I'll argue that these ones specifically, especially when we're considering decks that care about basics,
sure,
they have to help your strategy.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Definitely don't just, throw random ones in.
Correct.
Kessig Wolf Run, for instance, was a card that was really, really good in my Rada Heart of Kel deck.
That's the one. It taps for a colorless, but it's green-red color identity, and it gives trample and +X or something.
Yeah, so you pay X and green-red and tap it, and target creature gets +X/+O, trample, and haste.
Yeah, that's huge. And especially in a critical mass lands deck where you're trying to get a heap of lands out. Yeah. You pay 6 into Rada, give her a big boost, and then pump her a little bit more with Kessig Wolf Run.
Well, and the thing about Rada is she doesn't have trample inherently, so it's actually really important to have ways to give her trample specifically. So yeah, a card like Kessig Wolf Run, if you need either haste or trample or pumping it. That card is amazing and should go in your lands deck. But yeah, it is a land that you can't fetch and can't fetch other lands for you. So like, yes, definitely only play them if they are of benefit to you.
Yeah. I think, as well, you mentioned Myriad Landscape before. This is a non-basic land, but it can give you 2 landfall triggers for 2 mana when you need it. You can play it tapped and then untap. And then when you've got a good board of landfall triggers going on, or creatures or enchantments with landfall, you crack Myriad Landscape for 2 mana, you get 2 land ETBs.
Yeah.
If you've got Lotus Cobra down, that's free.
Oh, yeah.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty sick, actually. Yeah, for sure. I definitely would want to shout out, if we're talking about non-basic lands, some of my favorite lands in the format, the Hideaway lands. Thankfully, the ones that are in the landfall colors are arguably the strongest too.
Definitely.
Mosswort Bridge is amazing. All you need is total power 10 or greater to cast the Hideaway card. And the other one, which actually... I might not mention the other one because we're about to move into some other territory. But these lands are going to be really, really good because you can fetch them with certain ways.
Yes.
And also in like Amina and Den deck, you can bounce them to your hand, play them again, get the Hideaway.
I saw, and huge shout out to our mate Abe that showed me this kind of strat, is because with these lands, they ETB and then they hide away.
Yes.
And when you tap the land to activate the Hideaway to cast it, the land is now just like a land. It's just tapping for green or red.
Yes.
However, if you use Mina and Den's ability and bounce it to hand, you can play it again, tuck another spell.
Yeah,
it's
cast
very
that
cool.
spell, bounce it back. Yeah, they're super
cool.
super good in that deck.
And with that segue, I'm super excited to take a break because we've had some good thrifty interludes in the past.
Sure.
Very like on theme of the episode. This one, this is on the nose in like a horrific way. Like, it is so obvious why we chose this card.
Yeah, we like it. So we're going to have a little thrifty interlude. There's, of course, lots left to talk about. Ramp, card draw, removal, win cons, all the good stuff about building our deck. But before that, we need to hear a little something about a new thrifty card. So this episode's card is... Spine Rock Knoll. Would you like
It's another Hideaway land.
Another Hideaway land. Do you want to read
cool.
out what this card does? And then I'll give us our little... Oh, actually... Before we get to that, this one's a dialogue. Do you want to partake in my interlude this week?
Are we going to planeswalk early to the realm of Thrifty Thursdays?
Sure.
I'm down. I'm happy to help you out. Well, I'll
good.
read out the card because Spine Rock Knoll is the red Hideaway land Walt was referring to earlier. So it taps for a red and it has Hideaway 4. So when it ETBs, you look at the top 4 cards of your library, exile one of them face down, then put the rest at the bottom in a random order. It enters tapped, and you can pay red and tap it, and you can play the exiled card without paying its mana cost if an opponent was dealt 7 or more damage this turn.
I still think it's a slippery little frog back there.
Shush!
Yes, shush!
You shush!
Right! Shushing, yes, shush now.
As I've said before, why would anyone hide something as small as a frog somewhere as big as this?
Well, no one would ever find it here.
Yes, obviously. It would also be a complete waste of a secret mountain.
Perhaps it's a special frog. It's very hidden now, extremely so. I see it now! It is a frog!
That is your reflection again.
Get budgeted! Budgeted!
Oh,
Thanks for your resistance on that one.
I can almost envision where we got transported to there, and we're crouched down somewhere on a safari.
Somewhere, looking behind the Spine Rock Knoll.
You would actually be the last person I would take on a safari in Africa, because you would just be screaming, get budgeted, and lions would know exactly where we were.
I thought you were going to say I'd be like, just looking at every ant and bug, like, oh, James, look! James, it's an ant!
And
James,
be like, look at that beautiful elephant over there. You'd You'd be like, look at this bug.
That would be me, definitely.
100%.
Well, you can catch these text posts as they're released regularly on our Discord server, which is linked in the show notes. And you can see me bring some of these to life in monologue form over on TikTok at G_Commander Community. So check us a follow on there to see them as they come out.
Yeah, and Discord's obviously the best place to get in touch with Walt and I, learn more about what we're doing on the Patreon and the podcast and all that kind of stuff. So definitely jump into the Discord link, which is in the show notes.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we've got to build this bloody lands deck before they imprison us.
I just want my Wi-Fi back.
I just want to watch Lord of the Rings.
I want to play Modern Warfare 2 again.
So, what's next on our checklist? We've got all the lands sorted. We've got like good number. We know what we're looking for.
Know what the deck strategy is doing with our commander in mind. Yes. So, we naturally need to run through our deck building essentials list. Right?
Yes, sure. So the essentials of our deck. And this is sort of calling back to our deck building template. There's sort of like 3 or 4 categories here that we're mostly looking at.
Yep.
I guess the most obvious one for a lands deck is ramp.
Yeah, now this one is probably going to synergize with your deck more than usual. Obviously, ramp is something that we've talked about pretty divisively, actually, over the last couple of episodes lots of different ways, but we've constantly referenced an incredible pro Magic player, Sam Black, who had a Twitter thread not too long ago, and Sam Black says that mana rocks are a trap, but if you go back to any of the episodes in which we've discussed this before, Mana Curvy being the episode where we really outline it,
definitely,
we give it a real good run through, but in short, Sam Black will find you and break your legs if you put a mana rock in this lands deck.
Oh, I feel so bad. So he's such a gentleman.
No, he will bring a baseball bat to your local LGS. He'll come into your LGS with a baseball bat and just beat that arcane signet to a pulp. Why are you playing this in a land deck?
Oh, I'm so sorry, Sam. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. Yes. Look, I will say in the Sam vein of things, in a lands deck, don't play mana rocks.
No, this
you don't need them.
Obvious oversight.
Yes, they get removed. They are so, like, mana rocks are normally sort of neutral in synergy, right? They don't do anything that they technically don't do, detract anything. In a lands deck, in my opinion, every mana rock is a spot that could be a rampant growth, or a 3 visits, or a Farseek.
Correct.
And actually, those cards do synergize with your deck, so please, if you are playing a landfall deck, don't play Arcane Signet. I'm so sick of seeing it in every deck. You don't need Arcane Signet in every deck. You definitely don't need one in a land deck.
You know what absolutely shits me up the wall in a similar vein?
What?
The fact that the pre-constructed decks that Wizards of the Coast make have in landfall, in my Oboon deck, which is a pre-con landfall deck, it has Soul Ring and Arcane Signet in it.
Yeah.
I know that, look, I get that they need to reprint these, but they had, like, around Ikoria, they did multiple decks, right? They produced 2. They actually had one that was an artifact-based synergy. Fantastic. Reprint Soul Ring and Arcane Signet there. Reprint me a 3 visits in this landfall deck.
Yeah.
Why am I running Arcane Signet? Like, it just feels like such a wasted turn if on turn 2, instead of putting an extra land into play, which in Oboon could become a creature later on, could, be used as a win con, you're playing a mana rock that, yes, accelerates you in your mana and ramps you, doesn't actually do anything for your deck.
Yep. No, I'm with you. We won't rant any longer about that. The main thing, obviously, is the cards we do want are cards that get lands out of your deck and onto the battlefield specifically.
Yes.
Worth saying here, Sylvan Scrying is a great Magic card. It is not a ramp card. It gets a land into your hand, which is very helpful in a lot of circumstances, and in some instances, hitting your land drop, that's really, really important, but it's not ramp. So most of the cards we want are more like Kadama's Reach, Cultivate, Rampant Growth, Harrow, 3 Visits, Farseek. These are the cards that say, get a land out of your deck, put it on the battlefield.
I mean, you just listed like 7 spells then. Like, there you go. If you're in green, you can literally just rewind the podcast and take note of every spell that Walt just said. You've sorted your ramp base pretty close to done.
Yeah.
And you've got the right ramp spells. So yeah, again, want to stress, putting a land into your hand can fix you and get the colors that you need.
Yep.
But ramping is specifically giving you access to more mana than you usually would on the turn if you just hit your land drop every turn.
Yes, so you're going to need to get it onto the battlefield if you're going to be ramping ahead with mana, definitely. definitely. I think in these slots in a lands deck, obviously there are going to be cards that are sort of more like win cons. We talked before about Boundless Realms. Like, that's a 7-mana spell that gets a load of lands.
Technically ramps you. Technically.
Oh, absolutely it does.
Technically ramps you.
Definitely ramps you.
But it's not a ramp spell.
It's not really what... Yeah, it doesn't really fit the category of ramp spell, because generally speaking, we're ramping into an amount of mana that lets us do other things. At the point where we're casting Boundless Realms, we could have done pretty much anything else we wanted to. We've got 7 mana, right? So most of our ramp spells that we want... Ideally, the 2-mana slot is the best one, which is why you'll see a lot of Rampant Growth, Farseek, Nature's Law, 3 Visits. Those are the big ones.
But even the 3-mana slot in these decks is fantastic, because we can run Kildama's Reach and Cultivate, which put a land onto the battlefield tapped, a basic land, and put one into hand.
Yes.
And if you think about, if you have no lands in hand, but you've got a couple of creatures with landfall triggers on the battlefield, if you cast Cultivate, you get 2 landfall triggers.
Yeah.
Because you have one ETB from the spell, and then you
one
play
into your hand.
one. Which, this is why these spells are so much better than an Arcane Signet. Is because if you have these spells later in the game, casting them does stuff.
Yeah.
This is the thing. In a non-land matters deck, in green, you run these cards anyway. And later in the game, you might choose not to cast Cultivate, bit of a dead card to draw late game.
If you've got 10 or 20 lands already.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you ramp out, you're doing the thing already, you don't need to ramp anymore. But in this situation, Cultivate's a relevant spell.
Totally. It's hitting landfall, sometimes it's hitting 2 landfall triggers.
Yeah.
In a similar vein, there are 4-mana spells that are quite good in this slot. Obviously, we've got a lot of different iterations of cards like Explosive Vegetation. I'm a big fan of the 6-mana spell that you can cast for 4 and give someone else a land.
Yeah, that's a good one. There's also Sky Shroud Claim.
Sky Shroud Claim is really good because it gets 2 forests, so and they are untapped as well. They can be. So yeah, generally speaking, our rules with ramp that we normally follow will apply here. We want roughly half as much mana from them as we spent to cast them. So 4 mana for 2 lands is good. 4 mana for 1 land, not so good.
Yep.
3 mana for a land to hand and a land to the battlefield like Cultivate. That's also fine.
Because it's that landfall trigger that we're after in these decks. To if the synergy is there and it's working, that 3 mana to get 1 land but another landfall trigger in hand, that's like that extra bit of value on top of that typical manalith value that we referred to earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. But in general, that 2-mana slot is going to be probably the best one for us. In a deck like Mina and Den, for instance, Mina and Den is a 4-mana commander. If you are ramping on turn 2 for a single extra land, on turn 3 you get to cast Mina and Den every single time that you've ramped on turn 2. So if you're hitting your land drop. So yeah, the 2-mana spells, especially when you've got like 4-mana commanders around that kind of slot, they're going to be really, really, really good.
And if you want to learn more about this like curve of mana, our recent episode on Mana Curve is really good at explaining how to curve into your commander and the spells and the win cons that you want to cast.
Definitely.
Well, look, there's another way that lands decks often frequently ramp out.
Yep.
And actually, you've already mentioned one of the commanders that does it. It's playing extra lands for turn.
Oh, for sure. There's loads of different effects that do this in Commander. Often not super cheap in terms of like money.
No, well, they're often referred to as exploration effects because there is a 1-mana enchantment that just says you can play an extra land on your turn.
And it's called Exploration. Yep. Azusa Lost But Seeking is a creature that lets you play 2 extra lands per turn.
It's actually a legendary creature, so you could run this at the helm of your lands deck.
Definitely could. Wayward Sword Tooth lets you do the same thing. Yeah, a lot of these are fairly expensive. Because they're really, really strong, especially when you start doing stuff where you can play lands from your graveyard, Crucible of Worlds, Raminap Excavator, these sorts of effects that let you play lands from your graveyard. When you have a fetch land in your graveyard and you have the ability to play extra lands every turn, if you've got, say, an Evolving Wilds, you can play your Evolving Wilds from your graveyard as your land for turn, crack it, find a land, put it in your graveyard, use that again as your second land drop, and when you crack it and get that other land, you just gotten 4 landfall triggers on that turn.
Let's make a situation that's awesome. You have Azusa Lost But Seeking, a Fabled Passage in your graveyard, and Crucible of Worlds.
Oh, yuck. Yeah, so this is 6 landfall turns a turn.
6 landfalls. Now, I can make it even weirder and even nuttier. Ancient Green Warden instead of Azusa. Or instead of Crucible of Worlds.
Which lets you play lands from graveyard, but also landfall triggers happen twice.
That's 12 landfall triggers.
Yeah, disgusting. This is the kind of thing that landfall decks tend to do quite well, is they get the sort of different cogs whirring at the same time, and the cumulative effect of them all working at the same time is just unbelievably good. Like, put a Rampaging Baloths on that battlefield, you've just made 12 4/4 beasts.
That's insane.
It's crazy.
Well, like, I often find that the games that I win with my Fireleft deck are often the games where I've set up my board and my engine so well that I can get land drops.
Yes.
I can often do a whole turn and grow my board's power incomprehensibly without casting a spell. Yeah. Because, like, I activate Mina and Den, bounce a land, give a plant trample, play the land, grow that plant with trample, maybe crack that fetch land that I just... Yeah, it gets, like, this engine going, and often there's not even a spell on the stack for that blue control player to counter.
I think you're referring to something really important here, which is that lands decks, especially when you start playing extra lands during your turn, it's quite easy to run out of things to do. So having things on board that let you make the same actions again and again is going to be really helpful. But equally, something that's going to be really important, segue, card draw is going to be super important to ramp decks. So obviously, when you're talking about ramp, we normally recommend about 10 pieces. More than that for a landfall deck, more like 15 to 20. Card draw, I reckon, we've been saying at least 10, but ideally more like 15. I think landfall decks, this card draw slot is going to be super important because our ramp spells are going to empty our hand very, very quickly, especially if we're playing those low mana cost ramp spells.
Yeah, well, I mean, even, like, we're going to spam out all of these lands, and even, like, a Lotus Cobra is a version of burst ramp, which we've referred to before. Like, it gives you, like, mana in a burst, like you have to use it now or it goes away situation.
Yes, like a ritual.
That's 2 mana. You empty your hand so quickly with land decks because you have so much mana available to you.
Yes.
So card draw is going to be super important to us, and obviously we love synergy when we get to our essentials in general.
Yep.
So we're going to be looking for cards that draw us cards based on our strategy. Now, some are like really good in landfall situations. So there are a couple of spells that actually say landfall, essentially draw a card.
Yes.
So Tayover Benthic Druid is like the one we've mentioned before.
Straight up landfall, draw a card. AEC, I think it's called, is the 6 mana Simic commander that does the same thing.
So two of them are actually in the command zone available to you if you want to play that.
Yes.
But there are a couple of really, really strong ones. Like Seer's Sundial is an artifact, so it's colorless.
Yep.
Goes in any landfall deck.
Yep, this is the landfall pay 2 draw a card if you want to. Yep.
It's pretty good. And when we've got a ton of mana and no cards in hand, we're okay paying 2 mana for a card.
Definitely.
For sure.
Tireless Tracker is a similar sort of card. This is landfall, make a clue token. And clue tokens are colorless artifacts that you can pay 2 generic mana and sacrifice to draw a card.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's basically the same as Seer's Sundial, but these ones you can bank up over time. And you also put a counter on Tireless Tracker whenever you crack a clue. So it can get quite big, Tireless Tracker.
I run Tireless Tracker in my Fireleft deck because that secret fling of Tireless Tracker could be a really fun way to kill someone.
I never thought of doing that, but that's totally valid. Yeah.
There's one that I really, really love, and I think is actually borderline a win con in some of these decks. Valakut Exploration.
Oh, I love this card.
I've seen you play out an incredible turn with your Averna deck with this card on field.
It's an enchantment for 2 and a red. Landfall, exile the top card of your library. You can play that card this turn.
So this is what we'd refer to as impulse card draw.
Yes, the cards aren't going into your hand, but it's giving you access to more spells, more lands than you otherwise would have. So yeah, it's like card draw, but not quite. But definitely fits this slot of card draw. But importantly, the other line of text on Valakut Exploration is, at the beginning of the end step, you basically put all of the exiled cards into your graveyard, and each opponent loses life equal to the number of cards put into your graveyard this way. So, if you, obviously the card draw is fantastic on this spell, but if you cast your Boundless Realms and get 20 landfall triggers and get 20 cards in your Valakut Exploration, you can just move to your end step and deal 20 to each of your opponents. It is a extremely powerful card. Really, really good.
That's insane. And, if you don't quite kill them on a subsequent turn, you could cast something like a World Shaper and sacrifice it, and then bring all the land cards that you just milled back to the battlefield. It's a really strong card. I think it's super slept on in landfall decks for sure. And it's red. It goes in nearly all of them. Right?
Almost all of them. Yeah, absolutely it does.
So often I think that, like, obviously landfall is like one of our main strategies, but I think considering the colors that are very common, red, green being like the two that we're really focused on here, often we find that the deck will have like a strategy that's kind of outside of just landfall. So usually creature-based strategies are pretty common.
Yeah.
You mentioned Rampaging Bailiffs, which is a landfall trigger that makes a 4/4 beast.
Yes.
That's pretty hefty.
Yes.
And once you got a few of those beasts, you're really swinging for a lot of power.
Yep, there's a similar card that is almost a bit eye-rolly at this point because of how busted it can get. Scoot Swarm is for 2 and a green, landfall, make an insect, but if you have 6 or more lands, make a copy of Scoot Swarm instead. So this is literally exponential growth.
Yeah.
Once you've got 6 Scoot Swarms, it's landfall, make a Scoot Swarm, landfall, make 2 more Scoot Swarms, landfall, make 4, 8, 16, 32, etc. It gets out of hand really, really quickly. It's basically a win con on its own.
It's nuts. I've actually seen some board states where people have to use scientific calculators. You know, like, not a calculator, a calculator that calculates to the power of 50 to calculate how many Scoot Swarms they actually have.
It feels like a daily occurrence at this point where you're in the game store and someone says, hey, guess how many Scoot Swarms I have? And I'm always just like, an irrelevantly large number.
a number that will kill everyone if they let it get round to your turn again.
A number that deals more than 40 damage to each of your opponents.
Yeah. Do you have Goblin Bombardment? Just kill your opponents
just
now.
Win. Stop bragging about it. So obviously, like, our card draw can reflect the fact that our deck is a landfall deck, but is going to do this kind of thing. So if we're going to be going wide, the typical sort of go wide card draw is going to be really, really good. Shamanic Revelation is a really great card.
If you're going down the 1/1 route, Skull Clamp.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's a card that has been rumored to be on the watch list of banning.
Yeah, it's crazy strong.
Yeah.
In sort of the opposite direction, and this is probably the one you'll see more often with landfall. There's a lot of ways with landfall to get creatures really, really big. And green, which is again the color we're mostly going to be in, has lots of payoffs for creatures being very, very, very large.
Yeah.
So Garruk's Uprising, and creatures that are large, ETB, you draw a card. Return of the Wild Speaker, draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. Rishkar's Expertise, Greater Good. Basically all of the general power matters card draw spells, they're going to be amazing in these decks.
So once you figure out that if your deck is doing one of these things, maybe going wide with creatures or tall with creatures, choose your card draw fittingly.
Yes.
It'll synergize and you'll find you'll draw a lot more cards and you'll have more consistent games.
Absolutely you will. Definitely you will. It's also a good thing about card draw in a lands deck is you're generally going to have a lot more mana. So we sort of referred to this in the mana curve episode, but sometimes we tried to prioritize really low mana value card draw spells so we could hit land drops and stuff, but actually most of the time in a lands deck you can have quite high cost.
Like Rishkar's Expertise is
totally
6
viable.
mana, right?
Yeah. So normally that's still a great card, but it's going to be like a sort of game endy, refill the hand kind of thing late game. But in a lands deck, you could cast it on turn 4 quite comfortably, I think.
And still probably draw 4 cards. If you've got a Rampaging Bailiffs, you're good.
Definitely going to happen.
Alright, should we move on to the next set of essentials?
Sure.
Which is removal and board wipes.
Yes. Sort of the generic category of removal.
Getting rid of opponents' stuff.
Yes. Which we generally divide into, single target removal ish and mass removal ish.
And honestly, it's single target being I don't like that specific thing. I'm going to get rid of that.
Yes.
And I think the game needs to be restarted in a weird way, so I'm just going to blow everything up.
Yes.
And then continue from there.
Those are the two camps. So in terms of targeted removal, there's quite a few spells that actually care about the number of lands that you have.
Yeah.
And deal damage like equal to that amount kind of thing.
I've got a couple. So yeah, you're right. There's like Earth Tremor, there's Ground Assault.
Sure.
These are spells like Earth Tremor's 4 mana, Ground Assault is 2.
Yes.
These basically say deal damage to target creature equal to the number of lands you control.
Yes.
Now, we've said many times, we said it in this episode already, we love synergy in our spells that like the synergy in our essential spells.
Yes.
That pay off our other deck strategies.
Definitely.
It's kind of weird to say these actually don't do that.
No, I think the thing to keep in mind is that these are usually printed in limited environments where they actually are quite overcosted. Most of these effects cost you a lot more than the kind of just generically good removal that we might otherwise see. So, like fight spells, for instance, in our lands decks are probably overall more viable than these synergistic cards, mostly just because they cost like 2 mana instead of 4 or 5.
Well, like, Earth Tremor is a 4 mana spell, and I would rather run Chaos Warp and give them the chance of hitting a better permanent.
Definitely, I would. I'd also rather have I've been playing a lot of the 2 mana instant recently. That's like a bite spell, so it deals your creature deals damage because it's power to the other creature. They don't fight; they're just one-sided kind of thing. Yeah. But then if it has trample, excess damage is dealt to that creature's controller.
Is that ram through?
Ram through,
sick card.
Also a win con in the right deck. If you've got a massive creature with trample, you're just like, cool, ram through, you're dead.
Yeah, I just think these spells, like, I think it would be a go-to for a beginner to be like, oh, this says lands and it's removal. Walt and James say that they love spells that synergize with what their deck's doing.
Totally.
The reason why I'm saying this doesn't synergize is because it doesn't give your deck a advantage for using this spell over a better removal spell like a Chaos Warp, for example.
Yeah, I think you'd rather be more efficient in general.
Yeah.
Also, you're very likely to be in green, so the likelihood that you have basically the best artifact and enchantment removal possible, it's very high. So you can play your Krosan Grips, your Wilt, your Nature's Claim.
And you should as well.
Yeah, absolutely you should. You're getting access to some of the most efficient versions of these effects in the game.
So you may as well use it. So like if you're in a Oboon deck where you've got access to white, instead of running Earth Tremor, run a Path to Exile. Like if you've got access to it, that is a better removal spell for the game. You'll have more consistent games. I know it doesn't pay up. Well, I mean, Path to Exile, if you path your own thing, you can get a landfall trigger. So there you go. There's synergy.
We broke Path to Exile. Yes. We finally did it.
I knew there was a reason that card was good. It's landfall decks.
Well, in terms of, so that's like sort of single target removal. In terms of board wipes, it's worth mentioning here that, and we sort of mentioned this in our deck building template, if we're in only green itself is actually probably the worst color for mass removal. Maybe close to blue in that regard. But it's quite difficult for you to reset the board. And actually, it's kind of designed that way. Green generally is the deck that wants to have all the creatures and the really big creatures and the most creatures.
So a card that says destroy all creatures, a green player is scared of. They don't want to be casting it. They don't even want to see it.
Yes, you basically only want to be doing this if you're like miles behind and you must do something now. So, by all means, still play Blasphemous Act. That card is amazing.
Yeah, but really good in situations if you're going really tall.
Yeah.
And like, if you've got a Rada, for example, and you can get her to, 15 power toughness.
Yeah.
Cast Blasphemous Act, blow up everyone else's stiff, Rada's still there.
Keep my Rada, swing for lethal. Yeah, definitely. Super, super good. I think it's worth, because we talked about board wipes in our deck building template of sort of between 2 and 5 was a recommendation.
Yep.
I think, generally speaking, a landfall deck is going to be closer to that 2 number, maybe even 1. Like, it's really not something you're going to want to do very often. So if you are going to do it, like, you don't need many cards that do it, basically. You don't need the contingency that some other decks are going to need.
Now, I want to shout out a card that you run in your Cascade list.
Sure.
Which is super. I've seen it work 100,000 times, and I'm now convinced that this is a better board wipe than people are giving it credit for.
Sure.
Volcanic Torrent.
Yeah, this card's super, super good. This is a great card for this sort of a deck specifically because it's one-sided. So there's a few more steps that are involved. So it's basically for 4 and a red, you get a sorcery with Cascade that says it deals damage to each creature and each planeswalker you don't control.
Don't control being the best bit.
Yes, equal to the number of spells you've cast this turn. So by having Cascade, this is always doing at least 2 damage.
Yeah.
It is very easy, especially in a lands deck, to cast 1, 2, even 3 or 4 spells before Volcanic Torrent and deal 6 to only your opponent's stuff.
Yeah, in the world where you've already accelerated yourself heaps of mana, you've cast one of these like Rishkar's Expertise, refilled your hand to 7.
Yep.
You've probably got like maybe a Rampant Growth, a Lotus Cobra, maybe a Cultivate. Spam those out. Now you're blowing up your opponent's boards with Volcanic Torrent.
Yep.
And cascading into a 4-drop. It's pretty good.
I have been playing it in... I played it in my Cascade list. Obviously, it's very good in that. I've been playing it in a couple of other lists recently, and I've been really impressed.
I have been too. It has wiped my board multiple times now. And left yours alone. And a one-sided board wipe in Commander is I will win on my next turn if you don't redevelop up quick enough.
And it's only 5 mana.
It's
like,
nuts.
You know,
it's so good.
The equivalent versions of these effects are like 9 or 7 or something.
In Garrick's Wake is,
it's 9 mana.
9 mana,
Yeah. So definitely one to keep an eye out for.
Wild.
There are cards as well that you could be playing that will synergize a bit with your deck, like Destructive Force.
Oh, this one's spicy.
Yeah.
This one is... I will admit it is good.
It's definitely good.
But it is something that you'd want to highlight in Rule 0.
Definitely you would. So this one deals 5 damage to each creature you don't control? No, each creature.
Each creature,
Each creature takes 5, and each player sacrifices 5 lands.
So the secret tech here is like you've already accelerated maybe 5 lands ahead of your opponents.
Yeah.
So on turn 5, they've only accelerated like maybe 3 lands ahead. So you make them sacrifice 5 lands. You sacrifice a bunch too, but you are now miles ahead in terms of game actions at that stage of the games that are relevant.
Yes.
They're still if it gets to their turn, they're probably going to cast like, I don't know, maybe a
3-drop or
3-drop, and it feels terrible.
Yeah.
And you get to your turn, you cast a 6-drop.
Yeah.
You are winning the game.
Definitely you are. And this becomes even better if you're playing cards like your Ramunap Excavator, Crucible of Worlds, Conduit of Worlds? The recent one that was printed.
One.
The new one that does the same thing. Plays lands from graveyard. But yes, you're going to have significant upside from doing this.
Yeah.
Definitely highlight in Rule 0. But yeah, like that's going to synergize with your gameplay.
And obviously, look, if you've got access to white, there are incredible board wipes to choose from.
Oh, yeah. And likewise with black.
Yeah, exactly. So just think about the colors that you have access to.
Yeah.
Think about what they do the best. And think about, does your deck want to be board wiping in this way?
Yeah. And again, if you want more guidelines on that, the deck building template, I think it's episode 2 we talked about removal.
Yeah.
I believe. I think it was card draw ramp and then, yeah. So I'm pretty sure episode 2 of our deck building template, we went into basically how you choose your board wipes.
Yeah.
So definitely go check that out if you want to.
All right. So that's our essentials. End of the game. We need to win a game.
We do. We want to end them. We want to get to the win, yes.
I think there are some really fun win cons with land strategies.
Sure.
And I can think of like a couple of like big haymaker cards that just in land strategies are super fun.
Definitely.
And one of my favorite things to do in land-based strategies is turning your lands into creatures, which like eventually do the combat damage based win con. So cards like Sylvan Awakening turn all your lands into 2/2s with indestructible and haste.
Yeah, I think they even have
3 mana.
Vigilance, maybe?
No, I don't think they have vigilance.
Maybe it's
but
just
it's
haste
like
indestructible.
but 3 mana and turning all of your lands into creatures.
It's super good. Similar kind of thing with Kamal, Heart of Krosa.
You can pay, I think it's 2 mana and you can turn a land
into a 1/1. But then Kamal, it's more like a 4/4 because when you move to combat, Kamal casts Overrun.
Yeah, so you just on stick,
himself,
every combat.
Every one of your creatures gets +3/+3 and gets trampled till end of turn.
There's also a really cool card that I read in my Fire Left deck, which I've got off once, but it almost backfired. Have you had a Liege of the Tangle?
No.
There's a 7 mana 8/8, I think, that has, whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, you can put an Awakening counter. If you've got a weird counters build, this is a weird one for you.
Sure.
An Awakening counter on any number of lands you control, they are 8/8s.
Whoa!
Yeah. It's nuts.
I think I've seen this once and was like, okay, no one's ever letting that get
No, it's always going to be blocked. However, when I cast it, I got it onto someone. I managed to connect with someone because I think I used a Rogue's Passage effect and guaranteed the hit.
Sure.
And and this is like, obviously you've got your typical creature-based combat strategy win cons, like your Overwhelming Stampede.
Yeah.
And in land-based strategies, you've got Morag, Fury of Akun.
Oh, extra combats basically from landfall.
Yes.
Yeah.
So every landfall, it's a weird way it's worded, but creatures get +1 for each time they've gone to combat.
Yes.
And you get an additional combat whenever a land ETBs.
And a main phase after that one, and you untap all creatures. You're supposed to play it a particular way. I believe you're supposed to play your land on your second main phase.
Yeah, this is why I choose not to cast this card.
I think it only untaps creatures that have already attacked this turn.
Yeah.
So I think that's the tech. But read from someone else about this card.
Read the Oracle text.
I don't have the money for it.
Essentially what I had done is I had turned all my lands into 8/8s.
Sure.
And had a couple of extra triggers with Morag to go to combat multiple times.
Yikes.
So I was about to swing and someone cast like an instant speed damage-based board wipe. thank heck I had Heroic Intervention in my hand.
Wow, you had all the answers.
Yeah, it was literally... I think the only reason I put the Awakening counter on all of my lands is because I knew I could protect them.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's one of those things, if you can't give them indestructible in a way, it's really risky.
It's
super
really risky making your lands into creatures.
If you pass your turn and all your lands are creatures and someone goes, Wrath
of God?
Wrath of God, you're like, okay, cool, nothing.
Yeah.
I'm at turn 0 now.
Bye, guys. I'm going to go play with these guys over here.
Concede.
Yep.
Scoop.
I'm out of here. Yes, totally that's going to be a viable win con your lands decks. I suppose the other sort of direction you can go is if you're going all in on the landfall specifically. You're going to want those spells that get you a bunch of lands at once. We talked about Boundless Realms a couple of times. Scape Shift is another one that does the same thing. You sack any number of lands, you get that many lands onto the battlefield. One
that's come out recently from Brothers War, which I'm really keen to try in my Fire Life deck, is Awaken the Woods.
Oh, is this the X spell where you make that many Dryads?
It's basically Dryad Arbor. You make
that many Dryad Arbors,
that are also forests.
Yeah. It seems like a cool card,
it's
for sure.
Cool, and I think it's like one of those safer ways to get a bunch of landfall triggers and have lands be creatures. Because if you board wipe, yes, of course, all those 1/1s die and you lose a lot of those and it's tokens, so it's you're not getting them back. But at least your actual non-token lands are safe.
That's true, it's a bit safer than the alternatives. Yeah, that card I think is quite expensive because it was a mythic in Brothers War.
Yeah,
it is really, really good. So if you can get one, get one.
I have got one, I just haven't tested it yet. So I think at some point I'll chuck it in Fire Life.
It's definitely really, really,
definitely
really
a
good.
win con.
Yeah. Well, I suppose if we were going for a slightly spikier lands kind of deck, there are some land combos out there. I can see you've done a little bit of research. I might let you... I'm not a combo player myself. It's not the power level I'm usually attracted to, but I'll let you outline some and I will laugh gleefully at the concept of these.
Yeah, so obviously Walt and I are casual players and, instant win, instant kill combos are like something you highlight in Rule 0 to make sure everyone has a good time.
Not everyone wants them, yeah.
I thought lands are something that not often people think is something you can combo with, especially new players. They're like just part of the game's mechanics, right? However, I've got 3 combos that I'm happy to run through you to...
Sounds good.
Alright, first combo, I'm calling the Pile of Rocks combo.
I have an inkling where this is going.
It uses 3 cards. Togo, Goblin Weaponsmith.
Who makes rocks. When you landfall, yep.
Who also has Partner, interestingly.
Okay.
And Kadama of the East Tree.
So this can be your other partner. You've got 2 parts of your infinite combo in the command zone.
You want to know the last bit of the combo?
I'm guessing it's a bounce land.
It's Gruul Turf.
Yeah. Any bounce land. So I think the way that Kadama of the East Tree works with a bounce land is you play the bounce land, right?
I had to talk to a judge about this.
Okay, you run through it.
Because I assumed that it just worked. Because Kadama says, whenever a permanent enters the battlefield under your control, if it didn't enter via Kadama's ability, you may put another permanent with lesser mana value, equal or lesser mana value from your hand onto the battlefield. So I thought, with a bounce land, you play the bounce land, and you can stack the triggers, so the bounce land bounces first, and then you can have Kadama's ability resolve and put the bounce land back in. Therefore, you have infinite landfall triggers. That's not quite how it works. What it actually requires is something to generate a token on landfall, like Togo Goblin Weaponsmith. So whenever a land enters the battlefield, Togo makes a rock, which is an equipment where you can pay 1 and tap it and you deal 2 damage to any target, I think, or 1 damage to any target. Weird card. Basically, the steps on how this plays out is you play Gruul Turf with Togo and East Tree down. You get all the triggers. This is the order that you have to resolve them to get it to work. You resolve Kadama of the East Tree triggers first, and don't put anything from your hand onto the battlefield.
Okay.
So you just ignore that first one.
Sure.
Then you resolve the Gruul Turf trigger and bounce it back to your hand. Then you resolve the Togo trigger and create a rock token.
Sure.
Kadama triggers on the rock token. It sees the rock enter the battlefield, and then you put your Gruul Turf from your hand onto the battlefield. Then you repeat from step 4, basically.
The only time you need to outline this whole process is the first time you do it, and then you go, I would like to present a loop of doing this.
So you get a pile of rocks.
And most importantly, infinite landfall triggers.
So if you have, like, for example, a Scoot Swarm, a Lotus Cobra, there's plenty of ways to win from here.
Any payoff, really. I mean, even if you had an artifact payoff, like, there's that 2-mana Reckless Fireweaver. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, deals 1 damage to each opponent. if you just had that on the battlefield and then Togo did its thing, you got infinite rocks, so infinite damage to
there's
all
also
your opponents.
there's also an enchantment where you can tap an untap artifact you control to ping someone for 1. Electric Grid or something.
Girapur Aether Grid, I think it's called. Yeah, that would also do it. Yeah, good one.
Alright, next combo, I'm calling Frog Salvage.
I know where this one's going.
This one is actually a CDH combo, so definitely very high-powered, but basically requires the Gitrog monster, who is a black commander that black-green commander that we've failed to mention in this podcast so far. No,
but definitely a lands kind of thing.
Yeah,
lets you play an additional land on your turn, and whenever a land is put into your graveyard, you draw a card.
Yes.
Not just from the battlefield. So you can mill lands and draw cards with Gitrog.
With that in mind, you'll also need a Dakmor Salvage, which is a land that also has Dredge 3.
Right, so Dredge is when you can replace your next card draw with the effect of milling 3 cards and putting the Dredge card into your hand instead.
Correct.
Sure.
Then, the only other 2 pieces that you need to make this work is a free discard outlet on your field.
Right, so anything that just says discard a card, do something. Yep.
And then a Titan Shuffle effect. So not cheap to build, but you need like an Ulamog Ceaseless Hunger kind of thing to make this work.
Yep.
So basically what you end up with when you pull this off is infinite card draw, and you have all of the cards from your library and graveyard in your hand. You just have everything.
Seems fun.
Yeah. So if you have a Lotus Cobra, you're going nuts here.
Sure.
So basically what you need is the Gitrog monster and one of those discard outlets. So like Noose Constrictor is a really good one on the battlefield. You need Dakmor Salvage in hand and the Titan Shuffle effects like Ulamog, Infinite Gaia in your library.
Sure.
What happens? You discard Dakmor Salvage that triggers Gitrog monster.
So a trigger on the stack to draw a card.
Yeah. You then replace that draw trigger effect with Dakmor Salvage's Dredge 2.
So rather than draw a card, you're milling 2 cards, putting Dakmor Salvage in your hand.
Correct. Once you dredge, if you milled at least 1 land, you leave that draw trigger on the stack and repeat step 1, which is discarding back.
Yep.
Now, once you've milled your shuffler, you can then have it so you stack the card draw triggers to resolve the shuffle. Otherwise, you can just continue dredging until you hit a land drop, and then you can resolve all the card draw triggers that have been built up on the stack from Gitrog and draw your entire deck.
Seems good.
Yeah, it's kind of nuts.
Good.
You just let it all resolve, and you can just repeatedly discard. And like Noose Constrictor is a really good discard outlet because it will get basically infinitely big.
Oh, it's +1 counters when you discard, is it?
Oh, it gets +1/+1.
Oh, yeah. Cool. So you could just win that way if you needed to as well. Yeah.
It's kind of a weird one, and it also requires you to mill at least 1 land in the dredge section.
I think this is what they call a non-deterministic loop.
Yeah.
Right? It's a loop where you do not necessarily know exactly how it's going to end, so you have to technically play it out.
Yeah.
Some people will let you skip certain steps if you go like, I can do this until this happens, but technically speaking, it's not an infinite deterministic loop where it just happens and keeps going.
Well, as long as you have, like, if you didn't have the free discard outlet on board, it would be completely non-deterministic, but at least with the free discard outlet, when you dredge Dakmor Salvage back to hand, you can have another crack at going for it again.
That makes sense.
So you can, with the discard outlet on board, it's like I can present it actually happening every time.
Sure.
But without one, if you just get Dakmor Salvage into your graveyard at random, you can have a go, but you have to dredge at least a land every time.
Gotcha.
All right, my last combo is pretty funny.
Yep.
I'm calling it the Locus of Perilous Cobra.
Okay, I don't know where this one's going at all.
So you need Omnath Locus of Rage.
Okay, this is the one we took before. Landfall, make a 5/5 elemental.
Correct. You also need Lotus Cobra, which you mentioned a bunch of times.
Landfall, make a mana of any color.
Correct. And you'll also need Perilous Forays, which is a creature that says pay 1, sacrifice a creature, search your library for a basic land card, and put it onto the battlefield tapped and shuffle. So you see where I'm going with this?
I think I know where this is going.
Okay, so the result is, and this is a really strong reason why to want basics in your deck.
Yes.
Because this only fetches basics, but it essentially gives you near infinite damage, near infinite landfall triggers, and near infinite leaves the battlefield triggers with elementals.
Sure.
So,
and because of the trigger on Omnath, if Omnath is on the battlefield when you're doing all of this, then you just deal 3 damage to each opponent each time you do this, right? So it's basically wins the game.
It does basically win the game. And I think David, who runs the Omnath Locus of Rage deck, has this combo.
I've definitely seen this win before, I think. Yeah.
So basically all you have to do is have all of those permanents on the battlefield under your control and at least 1 generic mana available to you. So you need a token from Omnath or a creature of any kind, and Omnath, and Perilous Voice, and Lotus Cobra.
And a generic mana.
And 1 generic mana available to you. So what happens is you sacrifice the creature by paying 1 generic mana, and if it was an elemental, it triggers Omnath, and you target someone for 3 damage. Mm-hmm. Then the Perilous Foyer's trigger happens, and you go tutor your land from your library and put it onto the battlefield.
Right, and I'm guessing this next one will be that you make a 5/5 with Omnath.
Yep.
And you make a mana with Lotus Cobra.
Yep.
So now all you have to do is use that floating mana to sacrifice the elemental that you've just made to the Perilous Forays.
Yep.
Get another basic.
Rinse and repeat.
Repeat the process. Right.
It is a fun combo.
Wow.
But it's like lightning bolt, lightning bolt, lightning bolt, lightning bolt.
Yeah, that is fun.
It's cool, right?
I like that. I like that a lot. Very nice.
Alrighty, well, we've won the game now. We've won in lots of ways.
Sure.
I'm going to wrap it up.
Sounds good.
So, lands. They're in every single Magic deck. Usually, they are the first thing you'll learn of when you're actually taught Magic the Gathering. And while they might seem quiet and unassuming at first, when you start to utilize your lands for powers other than just generating you mana, you'll end up wielding the mighty force of a forest. Lands are the source of our magical powers after all, so it makes sense that a land-focused deck can actually make creatures incalculable in numbers. You can make them stronger than Yargle and Multani, the new spoiler from the Commander's set, and destroy your opponents with an overwhelming amount of value just by performing a game action that doesn't even pass priority. Space Commanders, command received. I like the lands decks. They're fun.
Yeah.
Lots of value, some really weird ways to win.
Very fun.
Good decks. I might maybe build another one.
Yeah.
Sounds like a fun thing to do.
It's definitely, having built that Averna deck not so long ago, it was definitely fun to revisit. So, to you listeners out there, do you feel commanded? Do you have a lands or landfall commander deck? Do we miss any awesome synergies? And do you think you can build a mono black lands deck with Ob Nixilis at the helm?
If you can, please send me the list. I want to see it.
Me too.
I'm really curious. I think you'd have to run like Fetches and Crucible of Worlds to make sure you get the landfall triggers happening,
surely.
Right?
Well, in terms of sending that list to us, you can send us an email, you can add us on Twitter, you can join our Discord, which we've mentioned before, which is linked in the show notes, chat with us and other members of our play group. And if you'd like to help us out that little bit more, there's a couple of things you can do. One of them is you can leave us a review on whichever platform you listen to us on, so specifically Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Can't do it on a Google Podcast. We hate Google. It. Stupid. But the main thing you can do we'll love you forever if you do it, is checking out our Patreon page. It's linked in the show notes. It's the absolute best way to support us directly.
Yeah, and this is pretty special. Within not about 5 minutes of us going live, we had someone sign up to the top tier of our Patreon, which is the category of Space Commander.
Sure,
now,
so another has joined the cohort.
Which is terrifying to think that one of our personal friends and incredible supporters of the Get Commanded podcast, Fletcher, thank you so much for supporting the work we do here. We will love you forever, as indicated in the rewards of the Patreon.
We really, really appreciate it. You're the best.
And we're looking forward to playing games with you.
Absolutely we are. Can't wait. We'd also like to thank, of course, Palms Off Gaming, who are sponsoring this podcast. They create some really fantastic deck boxes, sleeves, binders, and loads of other gaming accessories. They've even got soft shell jackets, which I know James had his eye on for a while.
Yeah, I'm having chats with the guys at Palms Off Gaming.
You know somebody?
To slip myself into one of those cool jackets for the winter.
Sounds good. You can check them out at palmsoffgaming.com.au.
All right. Well, it is tradition. Let's planeswalk the heck out of Magic the Gathering and into another world of your choosing this week. Where are we going?
That's true. We are going to planeswalk out of Magic the Gathering and into Bob's Burgers.
I love this show.
It is
so funny.
Good. So my partner has been rewatching the whole series. She's almost at the end.
The whole
now.
series. I don't think I've watched it in order.
I don't think I have either. So I think I watched it originally when I was sort of like 17 or 18, probably.
Yeah, like at the peak like adult TV cartoon comedy.
Yeah, definitely. And like I definitely liked it, but I sort of thought the humor was kind of weird. I didn't really get it.
Mm-hmm.
My partner has insisted that we watch it together.
Sure.
So we started at season 1. Oh my gosh, I had forgotten. I didn't think I understood how amusing the show is. It is so witty. All of the characters are so insane.
Yeah.
Which you might gather from my thrifty interludes and
You're a big fan of that, right?
I like the insane humor. It's kind of my thing, and I definitely appreciate it in the things that I watch. But yeah, man, I've been watching it with my partner. We've already finished season 1. We're starting on season 2.
How many episodes in a season?
I think there was like 10 in season 1, but I wouldn't be shocked if that goes up after season 1 because it was like definitely early days. Already the production value has gone up quite substantially.
It's just goofy, good adult. Like it walks that line where it's like it can be played at like 6 p.m. on TV and kids are still around, and it's like not rude enough to be like super bad. But like,
if you are an adult, you appreciate so much about what is going on.
Yeah.
We just watched an episode where Linda, Bob's partner, so they run a burger place.
Bob's Burgers.
Bob's Burgers is the name of that restaurant. And Bob, his wife, and his children help him to run the burger place. Linda is Bob's wife. In this particular episode, Linda had slipped Bob a pill for the purpose of getting intimate with Bob. And then they could not find their children, so they had to go and find them, and the effect of the pill had not worn off.
Was it a little blue?
The pill was not shown, which I'm sure was intentional. Probably for rating reasons they couldn't do it.
Enough.
And we never saw explicitly what was done with the pill. But when you're watching it, you know fully well what's happening. And he spends the entire episode pulling his shirt over the top of his front. So you can't see what's going on.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And towards the end of the episode, there is a large man made of taffy who is impaled on the front of Bob's body because he has taken that pill. It's hilarious. I highly recommend checking it out.
On the subject of planeswalking, I want to throw back to the planeswalker you did a while ago about Andor.
Yes.
Started watching it.
Oh.
It's really good.
It's really good.
The sets are what has just drawn me in. Like, you were right. The first couple of episodes, pretty dry.
Yeah.
But the sets and the visuals, I'm there for. It is just beautiful world.
It's one of those pieces of content where it's so obvious that the people who made it really, really care about doing a good job, and they've just like spared no expense at all. All the sets are amazing. All the score is amazing.
Yeah,
all the actors are like absolutely committed.
I'm only
to
3 episodes in, so, let's not talk too much.
No, but I'm excited to talk about the end when you get to the end of season 1 for sure. Well, that's all we have time for.
All right, we're finally let out of this room. We have our Wi-Fi back.
Oh yeah,
it's working again.
It's green light, but solid green light.
I'm gonna go play some Call of Duty.
Okay,
watch Lord of the Rings.
I'm gonna be here for the next 8 hours.
All right, fair enough. I'll see you tomorrow morning.
Sounds good.
When you're bloodshot red eyes.
All right. See you soon.
Goodbye, Space Commanders. Not Space Commanders. Goodbye, listeners. Goodbye, Commander players. Goodbye.
Bye.